inductive principle, however, is equally incapable of being proved by an appeal to experience. Experience might conceivably confirm the inductive principle as regards the cases that have already been examined, but as regards unexamined cases, it is the inductive principle alone that can justify any inference from what has been examined to what has not been examined. It says here, the general principles of science, such as the belief in the reign of law and the belief that every event must have a cause, are as completely dependent upon the inductive principle as are the beliefs of daily life. Did you get that? That is Bertrand Russell saying that this principle is at the bottom of everything that we do. But he admits ultimately that in his position, if you don't start with God from an unbelieving perspective, they don't have a justification for the principle of induction for future experience. Only the Christian ultimately does. Why? Revelational epistemology. God has spoken. And we have the confidence that the future will be like the past because of that revelation. Talking about the problem of induction, famous scene you want to go check out, go to YouTube, look up Greg Bahnsen Gordon Stein debate. Dr. Bahnsen pressed Gordon Stein on the issue of induction. No answer coming from Gordon Stein and ultimately from no other atheist. I heard an atheist the other day describing the issue of induction and presuppositionalists pressing this upon the unbeliever. And again, this is not simply a presuppositionalist parlor trick. It's a philosophical challenge that refutes your position, Mr. Atheist. And I heard an atheist talking about the problem of induction the other day. And it was funny. He was bringing up the issue that presuppositionalists will press this on the unbeliever because it's fundamental. It's talking about the preconditions for intelligible human experience. Atheists have tried to answer this. Skeptics have tried to answer this. Christians answer this. And this unbeliever says, well, it's just, parlor game, and it's just, it's special pleading, and on and on and on. And this other person on this radio program with this unbeliever, I think it's called, I forget, unbeliever radio program or something like that. And this woman asks the question, explain induction. And he starts to explain the principle of induction, the future will be like the past. And then he basically says, well, we have to assume that, or we'll die. Like that's his, or we'll die, or we can't do anything. Right. Well, we have to have this, or we can't do anything. Right. Isn't it amazing that the unbeliever so desperately clings to this ultimate starting point for himself as a gimme and says, just give me this as an ultimate starting point because if I don't have this, I can have nothing. And he grabs onto this ultimate starting point that is just a faith commitment. He has no justification for future experience. And then he comes over here and he chastises the Christian for having an ultimate starting point that in fact can make coherent the appeal to induction. Here's what I'm saying here. It's not special pleading when you hold yourself to the actual standard you're challenging somebody on. You see, isn't it amazing that the unbeliever today, the atheist, believes that he is a bag of stuff that will be gone and dust one day, and that's all there is. No justice ahead of anybody, no governance or order to the universe. That's it. We are all the descendants of fish and bacteria. And yet he has such a viciously strong commitment to induction. It absolutely contradicts everything he does every moment of his life. All right, guys, so there is the principle of induction. Pastor Luke, you have something to say on induction? Or?
No, I was just going to say, excuse me, I've been noticing lately, and it reminded me when I was listening to that clip, I don't know if you've had this interaction with a lot of atheists lately. It seems like they seem to have this attitude of, when you question them on whether on not being able to justify, say, induction or morality or anything like that, anything really, they seem to have an attitude of, well, who cares?
Yeah.
And I mean, I literally the other day was interacting with an atheist, and I was, questioning who justifies morality. He literally said, who cares? It's like, well, then why are you coming after me for something?
Yeah.
So this seems to be this attitude. It seems like that's the kind of the direction it's going. Is one, they kind of seem to don't even recognize that they can't justify stuff. But then two, I think it's driven by, well, it doesn't matter, who cares?
It's a hatred for God anyways.
Yeah, exactly.
It's ultimately what we say, it's suppression of truth. It's a hatred for God anyways, ultimately. Right. And I always find it just astonishing that when you have a Christian that says, well, I accept God's revelation, all of my experience is intelligible. I start with his revelation. I can make sense of the appeal to induction that I make and the appeal to the value and dignity of a human being and to laws of logic and into immaterial entities. I can actually make sense of it with God's revelation. I start with that. And the unbeliever mocks you as a Christian. Oh, that's just stupid and ignorant religious nutcase. And then all of a sudden you start pressing them. Well, how do you justify your appeal to the uniformity in nature? You can't do anything without that assumption.
Right.
How do you do it? He just goes, I just do. Mm-hmm. Because I have to have it or I die. It's like, that's an amazing leap that to criticize the Christian that actually makes sense of experience through starting with God's revelation and is not engaging in foolishness. And then when you're pressed on it as an atheist, you actually say, because. Mm-hmm. Well, why do you appeal to induction? Because I die. It's like whatever. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. And this is the substance of their arguments. They try to sound very sophisticated and very erudite and pull on, that's this logical fallacy or that logical fallacy. When in reality, all they have is a completely childish hold onto an answer because. Mm-hmm. Because, that's the answer. Okay, sorry. Here we go. Colin, you want to jump in real fast? Anything there that I said?
Oh, I just thought it was fascinating that the typical response to what you were saying, Luke, is who cares? Because that same response can be turned back on them when they say, I don't believe the Bible. Who cares?
Right, exactly.
So what?
If that's their attitude in the discussion, then everything just breaks down.
Yeah, start using that. The proverb says, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. You can certainly do that when the unbeliever says, well, who cares? And then they say, you start criticizing Christ, just say, well, who cares? Well, the Bible's mythology. Well, who cares? Let's use your standard of reasoning. Who cares, right? Who cares? Need to do that. All right, here we go. Redemption Radio now. This was Brett Strong, famous internet atheist, hostile and ferocious, vicious Brett Strong from Jesus is a Hoax blogspot.com. See, I actually know that. Jesus is a Hoax blogspot. We had Brett Strong on. Here we go. Here's the discussion.
Page. The
Brett,
reason why
your
we have
morality.
is because we're not on the same page on most things.
Okay, Brett, are we on the same page? Is it wrong to rape a woman?
Yes, intelligently,
who says,
that is wrong.
Who says?
Absolutely, you're violating another individual.
Okay, ready? Brett,
yes.
your intelligence tells you that it is wrong, but the rapist's intelligence tells him that he wants to do it and it's a good moral thing to do. So who's right? You or him?
Well, see, this is the point. That since we're individuals, it ultimately comes down to each individual.
So should the rapist
right?
Yeah. Should the rapist go to jail?
Hang on 1 second.
Okay.
I'll give you a second to speak. Slavery. Right? Let's take it back to your Christendom. Slave masters raped the women. They raped the girls. In their minds, they were morally correct. They were morally right. Right? But they were able to get away with it because they had the might. Now the mic has switched up and saying if you rape a woman in America, you will be put in prison.
So it's not really wrong.
Today,
so given your
it comes
Brett,
down to might. It's always been that way, Jeff Durbin.
Brett,
it'll always be that
Brett,
way.
You
know it because Christendom shows it in the black slavery.
Brett, if you don't let me get a word in, we're just going to have to take you off the show. This has to be a dialogue, Brett. When you bring up an issue, I want to make sure we get a chance to touch that. So what you're saying is that the society. First, you said it was your own intelligence that determines the norm, and then you said the society determines the norm. So which is it? Is it personal preference or is it societal conventions? Which is it? Because those are two different things.
It's a personal preference. But when you get the majority of people agreeing upon a certain thing, then that becomes the law of the day. So
what you're saying then I'm trying to reason through what you're saying and so as we go into the next break, we'll play the rest when we get back here, guys. Interesting to demonstrate here that the unbeliever is just floating in the air when it comes to the issue of morality. It's personal preference. It's society determines this. And so you'll notice and hang on to this that Brett Strong, well-known ferocious atheist, says at the beginning of the discussion we had, there is no morality. And then here he is complaining about morality, and then ultimately falling back to, well, it's just up to your own personal preference. Then he's like, no, it's society that determines it. It's just a mishmash of confusion, which is no wonder the Bible says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. All right. So we had Brett Strong on from JesusIsAHoaxBlogspot.com. The reason we got a hold of him initially was he was on the Unbelievable radio program with Justin Brierley famous British radio